Hey, what's going on, everybody? Welcome to my YouTube channel. My name is Kieran and I help people using a spiritual perspective. I'm a coach, I'm a guide, I'm a sarcastic, pasty white person, and I'm here to talk about enlightenment. Now, before I begin this video, which has already begun, so it's really redundant to even say that, but before I get into the meat of this video, I'd like to apologize for the AC in the background. I don't know if it's being picked up, if it's very loud, but it's really hot outside, almost disgustingly so, and I don't want to be sweaty, so I'm going to go ahead and keep it on, but I do apologize if it is picked up through the mic, if it's very loud and noisy. Depending on the quality of the video, I won't do it again, but for today, I'm going to just keep talking with it on in the background, but I do hope it isn't too annoying, and please forgive me. So, anyway, let's get into the topic today, which is about enlightenment. It is about how difficult it is to reach such a place, right? So I guess I should start by saying and asking you guys the question is, don't you think that trying to reach enlightenment becomes more difficult the harder you try? I don't know if you guys have realized that, but it's incredibly challenging for the spiritual seeker to reach enlightenment. The spiritual journey starts off as a very powerful, inspired course of action. It comes from, a sort of divinity that isn't present to the mind, and it inspires us with a sense of awe, and we become very enamored with it and swept up in the idea of getting to a place where we no longer have negative feelings, or our thoughts have changed, or we have abundance both internally and externally, and we are in a place in our lives where we have everything that we want, whether that's love, friendship, the job that we want to do, money, sex, power of some kind, our soul purpose. There's always this stuff that's laid out. There's this idea that this stuff over here will come to you once you find enlightenment, once you reach that place. And so we start a spiritual journey with the idea that there's an end goal. And the end goal is often called enlightenment. Sometimes it's called nirvana. Other times it's called heaven, really, is the idea throughout history. Is heaven has been the enlightenment place that you reach it when you're dead. So in life, it didn't really matter what you did as long as you adhered to the strict guidelines of whatever particular religion had that in mind, right? But in the spiritual terms, it's often called enlightenment, nirvana, things of that nature. There's other words, but I can't think of them off the top of my head. So it's a very difficult thing, though, isn't it? I mean, you guys have probably experienced this. We're promised this happy ever after, basically, and yet the journey itself becomes more difficult the longer you do it, and it doesn't really seem to have an end in sight. Now, I'm here to shed a little bit of light on that, not all of the light, because I'm still going through my own journeys, of course, as you probably are. But I'm here to shed a little bit of light on it from what I've picked up in my limited experience. And that is, enlightenment is not a place. It's not New York City. It's not Chicago. You don't reach it. You don't get there. Right? You take the story of the Buddha, okay, which I have right here, actually. This is him. This is the Buddha. The Buddha sat under a tree for X amount of days. I can't remember the exact number, 72? It was a lot of days, though. He sat under the tree until he reached enlightenment, supposedly. Now, that's a case in point is because all he did was sit under a tree and waited, essentially, for something to arise within him. He spent a long time meditating is really what he did. And what that means is he spent a long time being with himself. He spent a long time not searching for outward answers. He went underneath a tree, he waited, internally relying on his own intuition. I know that's not how the story was told, but that's essentially what happened. And then there was some enlightenment. Okay? But the way that spiritual teachers often go through these motions, the way that they educate us, is that it is a place that you get to. And then we, as spiritual seekers, even without that particular guidance, often see it as a place that we get to, like New York City or Chicago or some external place that you can go. It's why so many of us, myself included, went on all these spiritual journeys. We will constantly go to Sedona to try and take some, really way out there new age course. We'll go spend some days in the desert. We'll go on some spiritual retreat in Costa Rica. We will do wild things. We will take up plant medicines and go through shamans and take mushrooms and go on European backpacking trips in the middle of the summer, and we'll go through all of these weird and dangerous often experiences that are new, yes, and sometimes exciting, that ultimately don't leave us with much of anything. And it has been, in my experience anyway, left me with very little. They leave you with impressions and memories and wisdoms, but they never really did get to the point that I was trying to reach. It didn't bring me enlightenment, right? So enlightenment is not a place that you reach. It's a place that you find from within yourself. And it's a very different indication, actually, because you don't necessarily find New York City. You know where it is. You put your directions into your phone, using it for something other than cat videos for once, and you get there, you go there. It's not a place that you stumble upon. You don't go for a walk in the woods and find New York City. Right? If you go for a walk in the woods, you may find a beautiful stream, and that is the beauty of nature, and that's the beauty of that particular journey. But enlightenment is treated as a physical destination in which we must get to. Even though we're talking about something a little bit more abstract, we still teach it as a place, as a thing, as a way to reach, as a way to go. But as I said already, you guys may have noticed that the harder you try to reach this place, the harder you try to obtain enlightenment, you don't actually get there. You don't find it any easier than when you were doing nothing, or when you weren't trying to find it, essentially. And that kind of begs the question, why do we do it? Why do we try to find enlightenment? And why does it constantly elude us? Why does it present itself in our minds as a goal, a clear indicated goal that we are not able to reach and only seems to get farther away the more we try to get towards it? It's almost like that saying, when you try to catch a butterfly, it doesn't work, and then when you sort of relax and sit back, the butterfly kind of comes to you. I know that's not how the actual saying goes. That was a very messy explanation of it, but you get the point, right? You chase the butterfly, it doesn't come to you. So you chase enlightenment, it doesn't come to you. You try to get to enlightenment, it doesn't come to you. But when you stop looking for it, it comes. Now, there's definitely energetic reasons behind that we can talk about. We can talk about how naturally that the harder you go after something, it's almost repelled against you. And it's essentially because you're saying to yourself energetically, even on a subconscious level, I don't have this thing. So if you're reinforcing the need to go after something, you are on some level admitting to yourself that not only do you need it to continue, but that you ultimately do not have it, and you don't desperately have it. You feel that you don't have it every day, because that's the feeling of going after something that you really want, is you're reminded on a constant basis that you do not have that thing, and it is constantly showing up in your energy, constantly showing up in your subconscious, constantly showing up in your thoughts and your feelings. I don't have this thing. So the harder you go after something, it tends to repel yourself. It's sort of like why, you go after the guy or the woman and they're not interested. And then as soon as you don't care, they come after you. Now, that's technically unhealthy, but you get the idea. It's a lot of time in life, we are attracted to the things that don't want us. And then when we don't want them, they are attracted back to us. But that's also a little bit unhealthy, right? That's not how a healthy relationship, for example, would work. Where we often ignore the healthy relationships and go after the things that have been sort of patterns within our life, right? And it's the same thing with enlightenment. We're taking our own conditioning and applying it to something spiritual. Just because it's a spiritual thing doesn't mean that we're not applying our own psychological conditioned behaviors towards it. And that's the basis of spiritual egoism, is that we replaced our own ego with a spiritual ego. So now we think we are right. It's actually even harder to humble ourselves now, because we're under the grace of some supposed belief system that is just replacing our old psychological patterns with new labels. But they are the same thing underneath. It's the same energy, essentially. So yes, going after these things doesn't actually help. So that's the energy behind it, right? But strictly speaking, in a more, maybe, I don't know if you want to call it philosophical sense, but it doesn't make sense for enlightenment to be anywhere else. It doesn't make sense for the thing that you want to be 1,000 yards that way, or to be in Europe, or to be here, there, and there, and there, right? This profound feeling that we're trying to get after is already within us, right? Because that's what all of these people have realized. That's what they've all gone through. Anybody who's gone through any significant change in their life and discovered something close to enlightenment, whether it's just a realization of self, a closer connection to one's own personal spirituality, sense of divinity, we realize that it's always there. It was always there. So, tons of times in my life, even a smaller example, that I needed inner strength, some sense of like a belief in myself. All I had to do was look inside of myself and it was there. And that wasn't enlightenment, that was just strength, that was just an inner power. It's the same idea with enlightenment, right? Trying to get it towards a place where you're constantly chasing after it only results in disappointment. Because again, you're saying to yourself, well, I don't have this thing. I don't have it. But the real problem becomes that we need it. And that's where the real problem becomes. The energy and all that other stuff, it's a significant factor and it makes things more difficult. But the problem is that we treat enlightenment as a solution. We treat it as a God. We treat it as our happiness, our happily ever after, our heaven, okay, our nirvana. We treat it as the place that we must get to. And that's what causes the problems. It's not necessarily the fact that we're rejecting what we're going after by constantly telling ourselves that we don't have it. That's true. But if you examine the emotions, if you examine the real cause of your problems going on with this concept of finding enlightenment, it's actually very easy to realize that it's causing you so much disappointment because you care about it so much. Because it's your salvation. It's something that you feel you need to complete yourself. Instead of saying to yourself, well, maybe I'm okay as I am. Maybe right now, as an individual with my weaknesses and my strengths and my external circumstances and my internal beliefs, maybe I am still okay the way that I am. And this is even more true when we dissect the spiritual belief system of external deities. And when we look at the concept of God as love, when we look at the concept of spirit guides and angels and ancestors and unconditional love, essentially, we're looking at how people love us or other things love us regardless of how we feel about ourselves. And that's unconditional love. It's knowing the inner divinity within us. You don't have to call it divinity, of course. The inner spirit, the inner being, the thing separate from the mind, right? The who we really are. Sometimes, your parents, if you have healthy parents, but doesn't mean that you always get along with them, they might have some beliefs that, don't resonate with you, and maybe they're a little bit old school, but you know that they're good people and you still love them. Right? There's that unconditional love. And you might have that with your friends as well. So we treat our spirit guides like that too, right? Where they would look at us and they would love us regardless of if we had a bad day, right? So enlightenment becomes a trap that we fall into. I need to get to this place because if I get there, everything will be better. Rather than actually taking the more obvious approach, which is that things could be better now if I just felt they were. And that would make things better. Right? We're constantly going after our manifestations, constantly going after enlightenment because we think that thing will help, that we don't really rely on ourselves to give us any sense of peace. And that's ironically where the enlightenment comes from. Enlightenment is another word, a spiritual word maybe, for just saying a realization, a deep inner knowing, a sudden, miraculous understanding of something in very particular. And in this case, I think we're talking about our persona, our identity as a spiritual being, something spiritual, something beyond the mind, something beyond the body, something beyond what we can see, touch, hear, smell, something beyond our common senses, right? And that's enlightenment. And we're constantly shifting out of enlightenment by going after it. Even though in the present, maybe quite literally the present, this moment, right now as I'm speaking, or the present in a more general sense, as in like your day-to-day life, right? Enlightenment is not a place that will make you happy. The place that will make you happy is where you're uncomfortable, where things aren't going well. And that's where enlightenment comes from. That's why the Buddha went underneath a tree and was sitting there for X amount of days. He didn't really go anywhere. He just went to go be with himself. And it's the same type of idea. Now, not everybody should or will be the Buddha, or even take a similar monastery life like that, right? Not everybody in the world is going to be a monk, nor should they be. And it's the same idea for me and you. The idea is making time for ourselves may be harder than that of a monk who mostly just spends time in meditation, but that doesn't mean that we still cannot feel okay about ourselves in the present. And then enlightenment can come as a result, rather than trying to make it the end goal, the end result of everything. Because the mind thinks like that. The mind sees things as goals. It doesn't see things as, I'm okay already right now. That's not how the mind sees things. The mind constantly wants to improve. So you can even get stuck in self-improvement, right? The trap of enlightenment, the trap of spiritualism as well. Constantly needing to improve yourself, constantly needing to prove your worth, constantly needing to become this master, this better person, this image that you have in your head, this timing, constantly trying to control what you seem like to yourself and to other people and to the world in general. And that's a problem, because it takes you away from yourself. It takes you away from the present moment. It takes you away from any sense of joy or happiness you might be able to find now, even if things suck, right? Even if things aren't going the way that you would like them to. Life does not give a shit whether you like it or not. Life doesn't care. It doesn't care if you're having a good time or a bad time in relation to the existence of life. It truly does not care. We care. We care very deeply about life. We care so much about our spiritual awakening, our spiritual journey, that we must become enlightened. That we must get to this place, and once we are there, everything will be better. But that's not true. And it's not true even in other examples when people go after their dreams and successes. You see it all the time. People that are rich and famous kill themselves. They overdose on drugs. They're completely miserable. I always think of Anthony Bourdain, in my opinion, one of the luckiest people that could have ever lived. The guy traveled around the world making awesome TV shows. 2, I think, wrote a couple books, but he was a chef. He just went around different parts of the world, ate delicious food, met wonderful people, had striking, beautiful conversations, and relayed that to the rest of the world in a meaningful, impactful way that not just focused on food, but the importance of connectivity, the importance of human connection. And he did that wonderfully, and he still hung himself from a hotel room in France. The best job in the world. Still killed himself. Robin Williams still killed himself, right? Now, there might be medical things with Robin Williams, but that's hardly the point. The idea is that there's tons of people in the world who get what they want and are still unhappy. So this process of enlightenment, I notice, doesn't make anybody very happy at all. And the spiritual journey seems to wear a lot of people down. And we lose a lot of our faith and a lot of our joy because we put a lot of pressure on ourselves to reach a certain place. But it isn't New York. So, for the sake of this video, for the sake of yourself, next time you find yourself trying to reach this place, give yourself a moment to just believe that maybe you're already there, that maybe enlightenment is already within your grasp, and that trying to get to it is not actually the best way. You know, it's sort of like we think that life is this race, but maybe the starting line is where everything actually is, rather than the ending, right? It's not a race. It's not supposed to be like that. If enlightenment if it was already within your grasp, in your field, your aura, then certainly we wouldn't have to travel to get it. And there's that sort of loop in the mind that tells us that's wrong. But paradoxically, I think we all know that to be true intuitively, that the thing we're searching for is not something we have to go the distance for. Right? Anyway, generally speaking. So, that's my video for today, guys. I hope you guys resonated with it. Hope it makes sense. I'll talk to you guys soon, I hope, and I hope you guys have a good Monday. Okay, bye-bye.